For the final video on slope, we're going to take a look at point slope form. So this equation is really important for understanding point slope form. This is y equals mx plus b, and it is called point slope form. So let's go ahead and write that out. Again, I apologize for my sloppy handwriting. Okay, so this is point slope form. And not every time we get a slope problem is it going to be in this format, but we'll look at that later. First, I want to take a look at some equations that are already in this format, and then we can identify what's important. So the first thing we're going to do, though, is identify what these variables are. So y and x are placeholders. The important parts are that m, as we said in the last video, m equals slope, okay? And the b is your y-intercept. What this means is if we're needing to graph this particular equation, this point here will give us where the y crosses the origin, or where that point falls on the origin. So if we had a 3 there, then our point would be 0, 3, and we wouldn't go left or right, we would just go straight up to 3. So that is where our line meets the y-axis, and that is our y-intercept. This is important for graphing. So let's go ahead and take a look at a particular problem or a equation in this format, and then we can just identify from there our points, or our slope and our y-intercept. So our first one we're going to look at is y equals 2x plus 6. So this is already in point slope form, and we can actually just identify the slope and the y-intercept from here. So slope is 2 because this is our slope, and our y-intercept, which you'll sometimes see written like this, is a positive 6. So this, we could graph 0, 6 as a point, and then from there we could actually count 2 up and 1 over, and we would have our next point. So if we wanted to graph that, we could go over here. And we could say, okay, so we have 0, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So is our point all the way at the end of the line where the arrow is. And then we could go up 2 and over 1, and that would give us our point there. We could graph that line. And if you want to find in the other direction as well, you can just go down 2 and to the left 1, and it'll be kind of the same thing. So the line should go through those 3 points. So we could actually graph a line just from having the slope and the y-intercept. Let's go ahead and take a look at another equation. So we have, maybe we have y equals negative 3/2 x plus 6. So in this case, again, it's just a matter of, it's already in that point slope form, so we just need to know which numbers are which. So our 3/2 x is our slope. So that's going to be our slope will be a -3/2. So that means we would go down 3 and then to the right 2. Our y-intercept is 6. So that means at the point of 0, 6, we're going to meet the y-axis. So we could graph that by graphing that point and then going down 3 and to the right 2. And then we would have what our line looks like. And you can tell just from that, it's going to be a negative slope because you're going down. It's fairly simple to identify it when it's in this format. So we'll just do 2 more like that. And then we'll move on to how you take a look at, or how you go from an equation in standard form and find the slope and y-intercept that way. So for our next problem, we're going to have an equation that is y equals -x plus 3. So looking at this, we're going to have our slope be a -1. And the reason that is because that -x, whenever we have a variable alone like that, like an x or a y or whatever, it's assumed that the number in front of it is a 1. So you have one x there. So in that case, our slope would be a -1. And our y-intercept is going to be a +3. So we could look and graph at 0, 3. And then from there, we could go down 1 and to the right 1. And that would give us our line. Let's take a look at another problem. So our next problem is y equals 3x minus 4. Now, even though that -4 is not a +4, this is still in point slope form. The most important part is that the y is isolated. The x has a variable or a number in front of it, being whether it's, nothing there, that would signify 1, or all the way up to whatever number. And then our last part, the y-intercept, it can be positive or negative. And if it's negative, all that means is that our y-intercept will be a negative y-intercept as opposed to a positive. So first we're going to identify the slope, which is this this coefficient here. And that is going to be a slope of 3. And then for our y-intercept, like I said, this is a negative, so it's going to be a -4. So then if we were to graph this, we would put it at 0, -4. So we would actually go down, and then from there we would count up 3 and over 1 to find our next point. And that's really all there is to finding the slope and the y-intercept if the equation is already in point slope form. If it's not in point slope form, then we have to rearrange the equation and put it into point slope form in order to find the slope and the y-intercept. And we will do this a couple of different ways, and I'll show you that with the next problem. So let's take a look at this equation. It is -2x plus y equals 4. So already we can tell this is not in point slope form because we have both the y and the x variables on the same side, and we don't want that. We want y to be by itself on one side and then all other numbers and variables on the other side. So this is algebra, and so you're, hopefully you have some basis of algebra before you started this. So let's take a look. Our first step would be to move that 2x from the same side as the y. And since this is a -2x, what we're going to do is we're going to add 2x to both sides. So plus 2x plus 2x. And that will give us, that means that will cancel out on this side. and we will just have y left by itself. And then we have 4 plus 2x. This is okay, but we can actually rearrange it to put it into point slope form so it's not so confusing. We can just do that by changing the numbers around. It's a positive 2x, and that's a positive 4, so it's going to be y equals 2x plus 4. And then looking at that point, we're actually, from here, we can identify our slope and our y-intercept. So our slope is going to be here, and that's a 2. And our y-intercept is going to be here, and it's a positive 4. So we can actually graph this by graphing the point 0, 4, and then going up to and over 1, and that will give us our line. So taking a look at this problem, it's a little bit trickier because even like we have both variables on the same side, and the y is not isolated at all. So there will be a little bit of division here, but that's okay. It won't be too difficult. So we're gonna our first step is gonna be to move that negative 2x to the other side. That way we can get the 3y on its side by itself. And the way we do that is, since it's a negative 2x, we'll just add it to both sides so that it'll cancel out. So plus 2x plus 2x. And since this cancels out, we're left with 3y on this side. And we'll have 21 plus 2x on this side. You can go ahead and rearrange that now, or you can leave it as is. I'm going to go ahead and rearrange it. That way I can have it in almost that point slope format that I need. So I'm going to write it as 3y equals 2x, because that's positive. And then the 21 is positive, so we're going to leave that plus 21. Now, we're not completely done here because the y is not isolated. So we need to get that by itself. And since it's 3 times y, the way we get rid of that 3 is by dividing both sides by 3. So the way we can do this is we just divide. So we'll have the 3's will cancel out there. And we'll just have y on its own over here. And then the 2x, we can just break these out into 2 separate fractions here. So we can have 2x over 3 plus, and then 21 divided by 3, which you can either write out as 21 over 3 for now. And that's okay, you can do that. Or you can write it as 7 if that's easier for you. But that's up to you and what you're most comfortable with. I like to write out the steps just so I can keep track of what I'm doing. So from here, we'll go y equals, now what we can do is we can just move this 2/3 here, the 2 and the 3, and the x off to the side. And then we'll have plus 7, because 21 divided by 3 is 7. So now that we have it in point slope form, we have that 2/3 x plus 7 into the right format, we can now identify what our slope is. So slope is 2/3. And our y-intercept is 7. So that means at 0, 7, our line will cross the axis, the y-axis. So we can graph 0, 7, and from there we would go up 2 and 3 to the right. And that would give us our next point so that we could graph our line. That one's a little more complicated. It has a lot of steps to it, but you're going to see a lot of problems like this, especially if you're taking a test like the task or something. You will see more complicated problems like this. The best way to learn it is to just keep practicing. All right, let's take a look at a couple more problems. And for each of these, I would like you to attempt to do them on your own. So just pause and work them out, and then you can follow to see if you got it correct. So for our next problem, our equation is negative 4x plus 3y equals negative 6. So what we can do with this here is we can, obviously we have both variables on one side and we do not want that. So we need to start by moving the negative 4x over to the other side. And the way we do this is that we can add 4x to both sides. So plus 4x plus 4x, and these cancel out. So then we have 3y on the left side minus 6 plus 4x. And if you're comfortable, you can go ahead and rearrange that so that it is the other way, so you can start setting it up for point slope form. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now and arrange it as 4x, because that's a positive, so we don't need a negative sign there, minus 6, because the 6 is negative. So from here, we only have one more step left, and that is isolating the y by dividing both sides by 3. So we're going to divide by 3. And what we wind up with is these cancel out. So we have y on this side, and then we have our 4x over 3 minus 6 over 3. We can simplify that further. We're gonna go ahead and put our 4 thirds x minus, because it's going to stay negative, 6 divided by 3, which is 2. So now we can identify our slope and our y-intercept. So our slope is 4 thirds, and our y-intercept is negative 2. So what that means is we can graph it at 0, negative 2, and then we go 4 up and 3 to the right to get our next point, and then you have your line. All right, let's look at the next problem. For this next problem, you'll notice that the y is already isolated. It doesn't have a coefficient in front of it, so we won't have to do any division there in this round. So in order to isolate the y, we need to remove that 3x. And the way that we're going to do that this time is we're going to subtract, because it's positive on this side, and in order to get it to cancel out, we need to subtract it out. So we're going to subtract 3x from both sides. And what we're going to wind up with, y is alone on this side, so that's great. And then we're going to have negative 12 minus 3x. And we probably want to rearrange that just so that it is in the right form for easier identification of the slope and the y-intercept. So y equals, this is a negative 3x minus 12, because this is a negative 12. So we're going to leave it there at that, because we don't need to do any more. Now we can easily identify our slope, and our slope is our negative 3. And our y-intercept is our negative 12. And again, what that means is we would graph a point at 0, negative 12, and then from there we would go down 3 and over to the right 1, and then we could make our line from there. And that's where we're going to leave it. So I hope this has helped you. A lot in the point slope form centers around using algebraic skills to rearrange equations. So if that is a weak spot for you, I would definitely encourage you to use Khan Academy or Math Aids or whatever software you're comfortable with to generate some problems for you to practice rearranging equations, because that is a really important point when you're dealing with point slope form, as a lot of the problems you'll be given will be in standard form. So if that's a weak spot, definitely practice it. Go on to those websites that I've mentioned or any other that you can think of and try to practice more point slope form, because that is the best way to get familiar with a concept, is to just keep practicing it, check your answers, make sure you're doing it correct. And if you're not sure, ask someone, ask a teacher, ask a parent, ask a friend, or, you know, comment on here and ask me. I can try to help you with whatever your problem is. But the whole thing with math is just keep practicing. That's the best way to learn. Hope this helped.